Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Yes, we're super excited to get your perspective as someone who was raised by co-parents. I'm so excited for this episode because we're going to learn as co-parents, Jeffrey and I, our listeners that are co-parents, like what the impact might be of the things we're doing now, because you have lived it. As a child, you've lived through co-parenting. And so looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Thanks for being here. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, what do you do in the world? What do you care about?
I'm AshaAung Helmstetter. AshaAung is my first name. Already with the parenting, my parents wanted the name Asha because my dad is black and white. Well, they wanted a name that connected Africa and Asia because my mom is Asian, and so they picked a name that is both Sanskrit and Swahili.
Wow.
So Asha was the merging name. But of course, you know, it's not super popular for the type of Asian my mom is. She's Burmese. She's not Indian. So now often people are like, oh, Asha, you must either be, you know, Indian or Somalian. And I'm like, nope, neither of those. My parents just wanted to connect those. But yeah, I want to, I feel like a big part of being a good person is doing things for others as well. So that's like important to me. And I want to create like a really good life for myself and the people around me. And even if that's really unconventional and how I get there, I think that, you know, we don't always take the same path to get to our own happinesses. So I'm taking kind of an unusual path. I'm a painter. I do odd jobs. I didn't graduate from high school, and I've had a lot of health issues. So I'm kind of just completely taking a very unique path. And so that's kind of what's going on in my life.
I love that. I love that you said an unconventional path, because I definitely feel the same way. I haven't gone the way my parents and grandparents had anticipated. I've gone different ways to get to where I really want to be. So when you say you're going an unconventional way, like, do you have like some things that you want to accomplish that you have accomplished?
Yeah. Well, I want to be a parent at a certain point. That's really important to me. And I feel like for me, parenting starts way before actually like making a child.
Yes.
I'm trying to learn about gentle parenting now, and I have for the last few years. I'm already, you know, making decisions with my partner about things that we want in 10 years, you know, like, when we have a kid, I've already said, I'm like, we will be in couples therapy when I am pregnant, period. I don't care what we're going through.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, if we're like in a really good place, if we have really good communication, that's fine, but we should have couples therapy while I'm pregnant. Like, just things where I'm like, and again, big transitional points, like, we should have couples therapy when our kids are preteens and when our like big like changes in their lives, so that we're, you know, a united front. And I think, you know, co-parenting or together, you want to be able to kind of be a united front, especially when those big changes happen. So that's a really big goal of mine. And you know, just being a good parent and preparing for that, even though I'm 22, so it may be another 10 years before I'm a parent. I don't know. Not planning on it happening anytime soon. But that is definitely a big goal for me.
Awesome. I love that. Wait, remember we love to do a little clap when someone says something about therapy? Okay, let's go. Because we just want to like drill it in to anyone who ever listens to our episodes, that we very much value therapy and what it can do for you on an individual and communal level with your children and all that. So we're just going to do 2 claps for therapy. 1, 2. All right. We're doing it again. Ready?
1, 2, 3.
All right.
That was better than saying.
It was. We liked it.
So, a quick question I have, though, because I like the fact that you're thinking ahead of like, okay, we're going to get some therapy regardless if it's good or bad. Where did that come from?
So I've been in therapy since I was 14 or 15. I have a lot of health issues, and the first thing they were like, well, you know, maybe she's stressed. The doctors said that I should have a therapist. My parents didn't totally agree about what therapy was for me. Actually, part of what I wanted to talk about today was like talking about medical things, mental health or physical health, with your co-parent separately from your child, having meetings, having talks together where you are sort of making these decisions before it's a fight in front of your kid about, well, I want you to do this, or no, I don't want you to do this because we have this history in my family. I'm scared of therapy. Our kid isn't crazy. She shouldn't have to go to therapy. That kind of argument can happen, you know, and, you know, because a conclusion will come. Eventually, there will be a result, right? But I was definitely put in the middle of a lot of that when I started doing therapy, and I was really against it because I sort of sided with my parent who wasn't so excited about me doing therapy.
You sided with the parent that didn't want you to do that?
Yeah,
Okay.
because I just like, when the reasoning was fear, the reasoning was we have a history of mental illness in our family, and the way that, you know, the system has treated mental illness in the past, in the 60s, you know, was really violent and awful. And so, you know, having a parent who sort of equated therapy with, they're going to put you in an institution if you say the wrong thing, you know, expressing a lot of that. And I was like, well, you know, that's a really valid fear. Thanks. I don't want therapy then.
That's good enough for me.
Right.
No
Right,
thanks.
right. So the history of how mental health was treated, you've grown up with it, right?
Yeah.
So obviously you can see how, okay, I'm going to emphasize that because I was knocked for doing that. With your partner, how was that conversation like? Like, okay, this is important for me as far as like a parenting pillar of the focus on mental health, make sure we're okay.
Honestly, he's really receptive to it. He's like, we have different things that we need to work on individually. Yeah, he wants to work on his mental health, and that's like a priority for him as well. And I've made it really clear that I don't want to be in a relationship with someone who doesn't want to prioritize their mental health. A part of being co-parented and, you know, having co-parents who didn't have a podcast and didn't have some people to learn from, you know,
Right.
there was a lot of learning that I did with my parents, and I kind of went into dating knowing, like, very specifically what I wanted, you know, very specifically having seen, you know, the different ways dating can go for the adults around me. I was like, I know exactly what I want.
Right.
I'm going to be very clear about this from the get-go. And I also am kind of like, I'm a very honest person, so if I, like, I couldn't really not, you know? I couldn't not be like, oh, therapy is important to me. You need to be on board with therapy, because I'm already thinking it, and I can't shut up about it, so, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how that went.
I'm very fascinated of the multicultural upbringing that you had and the impact that it's had on you, like going from child to adulthood. Can you expound on that a little bit more?
It definitely, I think, since I was being co-parented since I was 6, it really started to show after my parents weren't together for me. My mom was raised in a household where she shared a room with her parents till she was 16, and that was normal and fine and okay. It wasn't, you know, for any reason other than they're a close family, and that's what you do. Right. There were definitely, like, big, like, American versus immigrant sort of how folks raise kids. We did more, like, we weren't really super religious at either house, but we had a lot more. Buddhism is a huge part of Burmese culture. Okay. So religion is, like, it was more of a cultural thing, it felt to me, than a religious thing. And so we did a lot. We went to the monastery with our mom, and we would be in communities that were very religious. And then at our dad's house, you know, we celebrated Christmas, and that was kind of the extent of it. So there were just little things, and, you know, my dad was nervous about my mom taking us out of the country. And he, you know, that was based in what he had heard, which I think my mom or whoever, you know, for one person, there's a joke. And a joke might be like, oh, if I go home, I'm never going to want to come back. And I want to take my girls with me, you know. Yeah. And for another person, that may be like, I am never sending my children anywhere with you, you know. Right. So definitely, like, clashes there. I know that when they were still married, she was maybe wanting to move back to Botswana again, because she was raised in Botswana. Very random Born in Burma until 5, and then raised in Botswana.
Okay.
After that, till she was 18. But she, you know, there was talk of like the whole family moving back there, but instead, you know, they got divorced and everyone stayed here. Yeah, I think it was just really like living in polar opposite households. And it wasn't just that, I mean, there was a lot in them being raised differently themselves and different culturally themselves. But my mom, I think, you know, my dad and stepmom had a much more like military and discipline makes results kind of, that's how we work in this household sort of setup. And both my dad and my stepmom was raised in a military family. My dad was in the Navy. And for my mom, you know, she was like, well, Burmese people, she's like, we don't focus on time. Like, you know, you get there at 5 o'clock, that could mean this or that, you know. And I'm not personally trying to generalize Burmese people. This is like what I was touching. It's like, you know, we don't think about, you know, what time things start. We don't, you know, it's all loose about, you know, what people mean when they say things, you know, and, you know, a lot of ideas around what's rude to say here, a lot of things about bodies, and like, you know, you see your grandma and she's like, oh, you've gotten very fat. And you're like, all right. So like, just like little things where you're like, okay, this, and then if you talked about it in the other household, they might say something like, she said that to you, or like that's just that side of the family. They are like that. And, you know, also my dad is Black and my mom is Asian, and there is a lot of anti-Blackness in Asian culture. So a lot of, after their divorce, there was a lot of, you know, resentment for my mom's side of the family for all kinds of random comments that you know, my dad would get as a Black man, and a lot of it, you know, is folks who, even though my mom was raised in Africa, what they were taught about Black Americans was so different than what they knew about Black folks around them. That when my grandmother and grandfather came here, you know, because they live here now, my mom's parents, basically my mom and aunt had, when you have kids, your parents come and help take care of the kids. And then when they had their youngest kids, my aunt had her youngest son, and then both of them went through divorces around the same time, my mom and my aunt, and so my grandparents just stayed, and they stayed to help raise the kids. So having family a lot more involved, I think, was definitely a big difference. You know, my dad's family is very spread out across the country, and then here in Seattle we have my mom, my aunt, my cousins, my mom's cousins, my grandparents, you know, like so much family that all moved here, you know. And then now my mom is also with an immigrant, and so their household, again, like my dad is married to a military brat and my mom is married to a Chilean immigrant, and so they like kind of found their something that fit them better. And of course, you know, my sister just kind of do the flip-flop, like, okay, we have this kind of energy in this space, and we bring another part of our personality to this space, because that's kind of how you know, exist in two different worlds.
Man,
Okay.
you
So
have a
tell
book
me-
on your hands.
Right. 3. You got
Yeah, straight
3
book.
books. Let us know when it comes out.
Right.
We'll happily read it. So how did you process, like maybe you're still processing, but like how did you process, okay, going from one household, more militant, going to another household, a whole nother experience, like how did you manage all that?
Now, my mom will say that we just were crazy at her house. She had way less rules. She was much less strict. And, you know, definitely I have a lot in common with both of my parents. And a lot of my dad's discipline. We talked about discipline a lot growing up. A lot of that has really helped me and is really good for the way I think. But also the way my mom is. And I, you know, now I work gig jobs. I have my planner scheduled, and also it looks very different every week. It's very, like, I kind of live in constant chaos, and I think I was kind of raised in chaos. And I usually like it. Oh, sorry, what was the question?
No. But like, juggling it. So it sounds like you've merged both of those experiences.
Yeah, and so my life is kind of like, I don't think I could be who I am now without both of these experiences that I had. But it was definitely like code switching. And my mom she would talk to her friends because she had a really big struggle because my sister and I really did like let loose a little bit at her house. The way we didn't do as many chores. We, she also like, we ate differently and our schedule was different. So like at our mom's house, sometimes dinner was at 9 p.m. and at our dad's house, it was 6 p.m. or whatever, dinner every night. And also a big difference was that part of the time we were being raised by a single mom who was trying to do it all by herself and had, I think like some, just a lot going on in her own life. And then at another house we had two parents who they were doing a double parent kind of roles, and they had more traditional man-woman roles in their gender roles in their relationship. And my stepmom taught me how to cook, and my dad will always say I pay bills and I take out the garbage. Like they have much more of a traditional setup, and my mom was like, I'm trying to do all of that.
Right.
How are you out? And you guys don't listen to me.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, but we already listened to Dad for 5 days. So.
Give us a break. This is our vacation.
This is our vacation. Yeah, and even my mom's friends would say that to her, like, when they would talk to her, because we had very open communication. And so then over the years, my mom has said, well, my friends have come to me and they'll say things like, they said to my mom, the reason why they do that with you is because they feel safe enough to let loose with you like that. But it really was just, kind of learning how to be in either of those environments. And I don't know that as kids, we necessarily did the best job. And I know that, like, co-parenting is all about what the parents do in order to make the kids' life stable. But I think when kids have a better understanding of what co-parenting really is, because while we did have a very transparent upbringing, there's also a lot of stuff that, my mom didn't tell us or my dad didn't tell us in order to, like, make our life feel more comfortable. And those were the parts where we would end up acting up, like my mom didn't want us to feel like oh gosh, like she didn't want us to know all that she was doing behind the scenes, and then that's where we're like, well, I didn't know that until I was older, that how many difficulties I was giving my mom by just completely being free and wild or whatever at her house. And I think that, maybe that a lot of it just takes age and time and understanding, but like being a co-parented child, definitely you can make life difficult for the adults as well, I think, because you just don't fully understand the situation at all.
And it's hard for you to settle.
Right.
Because you're switching houses.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I would say, I don't know, because I don't think there's anything on you. You're a child. You're learning, and you're doing things that I don't think are very well documented on how to navigate, right? Yeah. And so, like you said, there were some things that if you understood co-parenting more as a child, maybe you would have been able to process it and like interact a certain way. Are there some ideas you have around that? Maybe
I think. Gosh. Yeah, I don't mean it like it is on the child. I mean it like a child since children don't totally understand what is happening and how much work parents do put in. Right. They just, you just don't know the full situation, and so you are acting on the basis of the knowledge that you know. Right. I think definitely having, I just really, for parents to have co-parenting skills, I know you don't want to be married or in a relationship with the person who's your other parent anymore. Right. But if you are choosing to co-parent and my parents didn't have a custody lawyers when they got a divorce. They chose to do it all by themselves, but I think sometimes the wrong parts were in front of the kids and the fights we saw saw the difficult parts. And I think if the communication, if they had a weekly meeting where they talked about how things went at either house and then brought it to us instead of the kids telling the other parent how it went at the house. And then there was a while where we felt really weird, my sister and I, when I was like maybe 10 to 12, where we felt really uncomfortable telling one of our parents what we did at the other house, because we were like, well, maybe it's supposed to be like, I don't want them to get mad. I don't want them to get mad about what my life is like over there, so we're just not going to tell them.
And you want to be turned into a spy or nothing like that. It's got to
Can
report.
we talk? Let's pause here because I personally have been dealing with this, and I think we've got to a good place. But I would love your perspective because that's I would ask my son when he would come home, like, "Hey, so," and we have very different households. Like I'm definitely your mom, like the free spirited household, right? My son's like, it's free time at your house, but at Daddy's house we do work, and then there's some free time. And so. I said to say he would come home and I'd be like, oh, how was your week? How was your, like, I would just check in, how was your week? Very general question. And he'd be like, oh, I can't tell you. Daddy says I can't tell you. And I was just, my blood would boil because I'm like, why? I don't understand. Like, why can't I ask my son how he's doing? And I'm like, you're going to mess our child up.
That was word for word the kind of thing that my mom would say. Even now, she'll when she thinks back to when we were kids, what you just said, I'm like, I remember that to a T. And also, all of this is not to say we didn't have, like, a fun and awesome childhood at our dad's house as well. I know he was stricter, and we made our beds, but, like, the kids make their beds. Like, we had a good time. We went on road trips. We had a good time.
Okay.
Anyway, but I think, oh, gosh. I know what we're talking about. What was the question again?
But, like, it's more like, what are your thoughts? Like, as I'm trying to think about not, like, I mean, we've gotten to a place where we have an understanding. We all talk. My child's father and the girlfriend. We all talked about and got some more clarity on, like, personal business, like, what things you should and shouldn't share. But my son is so young, I don't think he's going to know how to decipher, oh, this is the thing I can share, and I'm just worried it's going to stress him out. I think, personally, and people can disagree with me about this, I think kids should be able to tell their parents anything. Yep. And I think that, it doesn't matter what household you're in, if something happens at a household and part of the parent's response then to your kid feeling comfortable telling you anything is not directing the anger that you feel from what you hear at your child. Right. And that's what's really hard, because maybe they were at Dad's house and you're like, oh, how was your week at Dad's house? And your kid says something like, oh, I know we were supposed to go to bed at 8:30, but we stayed up till 11 and we watched 2 movies and we ate, Twizzlers all night, and then, your other parent can't just go, oh, you did? That's against the rules here. That's bad for you. Why is your parent putting that in your life? They're irresponsible. That was something I was always scared of. I was scared of one of my parents thinking that my other parent was irresponsible or that they weren't able to watch me. That was, and I don't know if it was something specific that my parents did when I was little or whatever, because I know that they were both doing their best. But just that idea that I would say the wrong thing to my parents and then they would go, why would they say that to you? That's not okay for them to do that with a child. Why is your parent exposing you to these sorts of things? That was what I was always afraid of. And I know my sister was scared of that too, or I don't want to speak for her, but I feel like that was something that we were both afraid of. So definitely, like, for the receiving parent who wants to hear about about your kid, because, my mom would always say, she's like, even if you're with me half the time, you're my kid full time. I want to know what you're doing for the other half of the time. That. She said, I never thought I would be raising you only half the time. I always thought I would have my baby every day, And so being able to tell your parent exactly the things and also not get backlash. And then if that parent goes, now here's where it gets hard for all parents, right? Let's talk about it. If that parent gets angry and doesn't say anything to the kid, and then goes to the other parent and gets angry, and then the other parent goes to the kid and is like, you told your mom what we did blank? That was what we were doing. Why were you telling that your mom is judging me now because of the way that you did such and such? So then both parents, you basically have to trust, both parents have to kind of decide together and make like a pact, like that they both will not take out a child explaining what their life is like to the other parent or them, together, because, I mean, you can't make that decision by yourself. You can't go, I won't judge my kid, and then go have a conversation with your ex-partner and then have them be the one who's lecturing your kid about the situation.
Here, I agree with you. But here's the slippery slope with that. Asking how your kid is doing versus having your kid report to you are two different things, right? So if you're in a co-parenting situation where one parent has a little bit of animosity towards the other, they can spin that just like asking how your kid is doing just to get an insight of what's going on at the other house. So based on your upbringing experiences, how can parents avoid that?
I think
that dynamic.
Definitely it's situation to situation. I would just start the focus on the child only. Not like, oh, you know, how's your other parent doing?
Right.
How's the new girlfriend? None of those questions at first. Unless, you know, I also, just overthinking here. I'm like, well, eventually the kid's going to go, you don't care about my other parent anymore because you never ask about them. I'm not, because I do think that kids feel that way. Kids feel bad that their parents don't like each other. Because for a child, for me, I'm not going to say a child, for me, you know, I am so much like my dad, and I am so much like my mom. And the fact that my parents didn't get along when I was growing up, it felt like they didn't like me. And at a certain point when I was like 12 years old, I went to my mom and I said, Mom, you divorced my dad, not me. And I was just so mad at her because I was like, you're like you're getting angry at things about me that are just the only reason why you're mad about them is because they're like dad also. And, you know, that took her, like, she was very receptive to it, thank goodness. And it took her a while, but she's like, oh my goodness. But definitely, like, there's always that sort of feeling that, like, the hate or not hate, the just, you know, them not being together not necessarily is because of you. Because I think we talk a lot about kids thinking that parents aren't together because of them. But more like you think your parent doesn't like you as much because of things that are like your other parent. So I definitely, so I definitely think that, like, after a while, maybe, you know, questions about how's your dad doing? I hope he's doing okay. Like, you know, did you guys have a fun week all together? But starting with questions that are like, how was your week? What did you do at school? What were activities that you did with your family, you know? So the kid feels centered. And then when I don't know, I'm not a parent yet, and I'm not a co-parent, so I can't say that this is, but I feel like there's a point in your questions where you start to go, and how's that, when you start to feel your eyebrow raising, and when you start
check your face.
When you're starting to feel your jaw clench a little bit, and you're like, and how's your father? You're like, oh wait, why am I asking this question? Let me take a second, because, you know, I'm following all these gentle parenting things, right? And a lot of them talk about how, like, kids don't know how to regulate all their emotions yet, and if we want to teach children how to regulate emotions properly, we need to do that for ourselves. So the really big question then is not necessarily how do I ask my kid about the week without going overboard, is how do I rein myself in when I feel like I'm asking the wrong, I'm asking my kid these questions for the wrong reason.
Self-management. I'll say, like, whenever I would, that's what frustrated me about my situation when I was dealing with that with my child's father, is like, I don't have any ill will. And the question genuinely was like, how was your week? And that's what frustrated me about my situations, because when I would ask that question of, like, how was your week, it was genuine. It was like, I really want to know how your week was, and to be met with resistance. And also I felt like I want to build a relationship where my son feels like he can tell me anything. And so it felt like my co-parent was getting the way of that. And also from a safety standpoint, like, my child should feel free to tell me anything, even if it's things that are harmful. And if he's having to filter through what he should and shouldn't tell, then that's, for safety purpose, not right. And my co-parent team, we're all aligned on that, which is great. We had to have a real serious conversation, but that conversation,
see, then I'm like, that's a continuous conversation, because if you're checking in with your co-parent weekly or every time you switch, if your other parent is able to tell you, like, here's a bullet point of things we did this week, and then you go to your kid and you're like, your dad told me that you guys went to the water park this week. How was that for you? Then the kid's like, oh my goodness, I'm not in trouble for answering these questions. She's not trying to figure out, she already knows what my life is like over there. She now wants to know, you know, how I'm feeling about it. So again, recentering the child by having those conversations away from them. Because I think that is, like, we always felt like we were being a spy. Like, if we were asked about how it's going at the other house, and it wasn't based on anything. Maybe it was, but we always were like, oh, what should I tell you this? Because I don't want you to know, you guys are separate, whatever. So, like, if you are already in communication, you already know what happened, and now it's more about feelings, centering your questions around how your kid is feeling instead of what actually happened. I think they're more likely to eventually open up to what brought on those feelings and what the situation was that created the feelings. How did you feel this week? What made you happy this week?
Right.
What made you sad this week?
Right.
What do you want to tell me about while we weren't together? Instead of, like, what did you do?
Right.
And I think another important piece is the parents have to build trust, right?
Yeah.
So I got to understand, is there a trust thing that me and my ex need to work on, that he thinks that my child might say something that's going to make him inconvenienced? Or, because I'm not going to go around and, like, tell people, I'm not going to go, so I'm like, I need to understand from him, like, what is driving that desire. And as long as we're building trust, so that my kid can tell me everything, right? And, like, he doesn't feel threatened or feel like it's going to be used. Because I know there's I have close friends who, like, if their kids say just the right thing or get hurt just in the right way, tripping off their bike, they're in fear. The parents in fear because now the court's going to get involved and all. So I get where some of that fear is for other people. I was like, but for us, we don't need that kind of fear.
Yeah.
But I can see why, and it's just so sad.
Yeah, I totally agree. I see where you're coming from. I definitely think that parents have a really difficult line to walk, and I think you just have to remember that, like, even if you don't think that the parent is the person you thought they were when you guys had your baby together initially, that really you have chosen to trust this person with your child. So by trust, I mean, would you trust someone with your child who you don't trust with yourself? And finding that openness for both parents, this is for everyone, and then maybe this is something that not just you need to work on, also your co-parent, but, like, you really are trusting this person. Like, whether you think you are or not, they have your kid for a bunch of time. You have to. They get to know what's in your life, and you have to. You mean, if that's a conversation about, like, hey, don't talk to other people about this, whatever, and however you guys decide your parenting plan needs to be based on that trust. Because if you don't trust them, maybe you guys shouldn't even really be in a co-parenting kind of relationship at that point, which is really sad and sucks. That sucks. You want your kid growing up with both parents.
Absolutely. You got to make sure. It would be best if you're with somebody that you can be with. Yeah. But at least make sure that there's someone that's capable of having that discussion of co-parenting and things like that. Right. I'm actually curious because, like I said, you have a book that you need to write. So I'll just put that in your head real quick. But how did your parents meet?
They met in college.
Okay.
They met in college. My mom had just moved to the States, and my dad had just come back from being in the Navy. And so they were a few years apart, and they went to school together. That's how they met. And then they were together for 15 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's so dope.
I know, that's really powerful.
So,
and not look at these beautiful kids.
Right. The artists. But also, we talked off camera. You used to be a teacher.
Yes.
Did you ever encounter co-parenting situations with the parents of the students you taught?
It was a very specific demographic at the school I was working at. We did not see a lot of co-parenting. We saw mostly, there was a couple single parents, but mostly it was like, two parents, a kid or two, a dog, maybe, a cat,
Speaking about dogs, you have to tell our listeners about how you lived with your dog full time, but like tell us about that.
So growing when I was 8, I'm a pretty persuasive person, and when I was a kid, especially, I don't know, I had like the universe working on my side to get me a dog because there was like we're getting divorced guilt going on, and there was like we need to find comfort for our children, whatever. But I begged for a dog for like a year. And when I was 8, I finally got one. Her name was Blackberry. I loved her dearly. We had her for almost 10 years, but she passed away just before her 10th birthday from bone cancer. But I had her from when I was 8 till when I was 18. And gosh, she taught me a lot about responsibility. Right in that 8 range where I got to learn a lot about responsibility with her. But she went back and forth with my sister and I between houses So I lived with my dog full time, but neither of my parents
Right.
full time. And that is hilarious to me. And people
That's
used to be
pretty dope.
shocked, you know. I would say, yeah, I have this big giant mastiff dog. Her name is Blackberry. And they're like, oh, what house does she live at? And she's like, what? I was like, what do you mean? She lives in my room, in my bed. Like,
Right,
she
wherever
comes back
that
and forth
is.
with me, you know. Like, but also, she had two very different lives as well. Like, in one house, she, like, stayed in her crate upstairs, like she couldn't come on the carpets because there was allergies in the house, and at the other house she was everywhere. She was in every
Was
room.
that mom's house?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Like a different set of rules at both houses.
Yes.
But yeah, I spent so much time with that dog. I mean, that her Blackberry. We were very, 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 very close, and she was another thing that both of my parents had bonded with, but after they had separated. So, like, when she passed away, the whole family, like, we were all with her we did it in my dad's house because we knew the cancer was really, really bad. And she was suffering. But my mom and my soon-to-be stepdad and my stepmom and my dad and my sister and my little brother, who's my dad and stepmom's son, and we were all together in the house, with Blackberry, and she came, you know, after they had separated.
Okay. Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah, and yeah, it was definitely, I feel really lucky to have had her. Yeah, she's a big part of growing up, and definitely like a comfort animal.
Yeah.
Like more
That's what I was
harder
thinking,
moments.
like, yeah.
Yeah. My mom will now sometimes say, oh, we could have gotten you a teddy bear, but
Too late. No, I love that. I love that they agreed on that together. So that brings me to my next question, which is, what are some things that you loved that they did when navigating the co-parenting
I
space?
loved their schedule. Okay. I loved that they had this schedule, and I loved that they came up with it without a lawyer. Okay. We were with our dad on Monday and Tuesday, and then we were with my mom on Wednesday and Thursday. Okay. And then we switched back and forth Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays. So we would have full weekends, and we would basically be 5 days with one parent, 2 days with the other parent, and then switched. Okay. So it would be kind of it would come together as like a 5-2-2, 5-2-5 kind of whatever. Which meant we had time for weekend road trips with one side. Okay. We had time for, you know, family dinners, big things, whatever. I really loved that. I think sometimes my parents will say that maybe they wish that they did a less chaotic, like, schedule for us, because they thought maybe we wanted more consistency. But honestly, I was so happy to have both of my parents so involved with my life. Right. I definitely, like, lost a lot of things, and I definitely, like, we were scrambling sometimes, and maybe, again, like, I live kind of a chaotic life now, and maybe it has been a part of that, but definitely, like, I had friends who only saw their dads on the weekends, and I had even seeing family members and stuff where, like, hearing from adults, like, oh, well, I have to be the serious parent, and they get to be the fun parent because they have all the fun days and I have all the school days, you know, like hearing people go through that, and then hearing from other friends like, oh, well, I'm not going to see my dad for 2 weeks, so, you know, I'll show it to him when I felt so fortunate to get to see my parents so often.
Every week you saw both parents.
Yeah,
Yes.
every week I saw both parents. And now I think when the pandemic started, my sister does 2 weeks at a time now, but I think that's okay. She's older. She's 17, and I think that is fine now. But, like, definitely for, like, being little kids, getting to have so much time with our parents, and also giving them each, I don't want to say this like they didn't want us, because I know they really did, and I know that both of them, if they, like, could have chosen, and if they didn't choose this because they were being selfless. This was a selfless thing they did to, you know, not fight for full custody. Both of them would have wanted full custody, and I know this, they've said things about this, you know. But they, especially when they were both single parents, had 5 days to where they could get their things together and do their own thing and be an adult where they don't have kids with them. And I think that's really important, because I think all parents deserve time off. And when you're single parenting, you have to be on. Right. So I think that schedule actually worked really well. Personally, I think that was good for the most part. And I think that, you know, having flexibility around holidays and vacations is really good. Being able to give both parents time to do that. That's outside of the 5-day, but like for a regular, like day to day while there's school, whatever, I think that was a really nice schedule that we had for us. And I don't know if it would work for everyone, because again, it was super chaotic, but yeah.
What are some other things that like you felt like you'd want to carry forward, you'd want to encourage other co-parents to do?
We now are starting to again do a lot. We do quite a few holidays together. Birthdays, for a while we didn't, but we've done a lot of birthdays where everyone is there. We have done, Thanksgivings with the entire family, Christmases, even during COVID, we had an outdoor Christmas where we set up heaters and we were in a backyard and we had my mom's side and my dad's side all together. I think, again, really it was about the quality time that we got to spend with both of our parents, because that's what we were really missing. So I think my parents really emphasized us being able to see both of them growing up, and that was what was super important to us, and getting to see them interact. And for a while they couldn't, because they were in the depths of not liking each other, but once they let that settle a little bit, which took years, we got to get back to a point of this is my family. And I don't have in my head, sometimes I'm reminded, because the universe doesn't always agree with me, but in my head I don't have two families. In my head I have a family. And being all of the ways that they emphasize that we are a family, at least for my sister and brother and I, we are a family.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that was very important. And also not calling my brother my half brother. That was really important to me growing up.
Talk to me. Tell me about that.
I think it would separate us. It does this sort of divide of oh, but he's not really your brother, or he's not really this. But I love him so much. I love him like he's my brother. There's no half love or half whatever about it, So that was really important. And then my stepmom was very thoroughly part of parenting decisions and whatever. She wasn't just this person in our life and space. And our dad always said he wasn't going to be with someone who wasn't going to be really a part of our lives and who wouldn't get along with us. I think it's also just, when you have new partners, they become a part of the family and they become a part of that circle. And so I don't know, if I'm going to be living with someone, when I was whoever I was living with as a kid, they're the inner circle. And so not having a villainized stepmother, not having a
Cinderella.
Yeah, no Cinderella thing,
there's so many more references.
Yeah, you'll get so scared that your parent is going to pick a partner that's just gonna want to be with your parent and doesn't care about you. And I've seen it, seeing these partners who are oh, I really like this person, but they got kids, and you're stop there. You don't like that person then, because the kids are a part of them,
We talked about
that. Yeah, we did. And that's always so weird to me, how people get mad when they chose to date somebody who has children.
Right.
Like they get bitter about it. That's that's weird to me.
It's so weird.
It is, but
And I also think that, my stepmom took her time, and she wasn't too I'm your mother when she showed up. And I also appreciate that, because she's not my mother.
Right.
And I call her Sama. I took stepmama and mashed it together. She's Sama.
Oh,
because I think that is much more wholesome than
That's
stepmother.
pretty,
yeah.
But she's not my mom. She's not there to replace anyone. My stepdad isn't there to replace anyone either, So I call him by his name. I call her Sama because he's more recent. I just met him at 6 weeks. I just met him. He's newer. I was closer to being an adult when we met. But definitely just sort of knowing that we can have adult roles in our lives who are partners with our parents that aren't replacing our parents or against us. Or, finding a happy medium and a balance with that, playing a mentorship role or whatever you think an auntie would do, but not, because it's different also. It's really its own thing. And when you try and make it something that's different, I think my parents did a really good job of not making a step-parent role anything but being what it was, and sort of just being a person who comes in and is I love you because I love this person also, and I want to be a part of your life, and I'm not taking the place of anyone else, and so
that's beautiful. That's
my parents did a really good job with that.
It sounds wonderful. I'm curious with your younger sister. How's that relationship between you? Because she's going through that right now, what you grew up in, right?
My sister and I are ridiculously close.
Okay, that's beautiful.
Sometimes my mom is like, oh, she'll say something about like, oh, well, she used to make this joke where she would say, my sister's her boss and I was her mom. Which is, it is what it is. My sister and I were very close, and I definitely took on like a very like, I was a babysitter a lot, I was a person for advice a lot, and now sometimes it's in my head that I have a little bit more power than I do, and I have to rein that back a little bit, you know. Self-management, you know. But like, I adore my sister, and we have so much in common. There's no one else who I have that same amount in common with, because we were raised in the same flip-flop, reverse whatever environment, and we're both Burmese and Chinese and Black American and white American and Native, and we were very like this very specific mix, and we were raised in a very specific way that I've never met anyone else who's been raised like my sister and I. So we have like this like ridiculous bond. I was like on FaceTime with her on the way over here, you know.
That's nice.
But
sweet.
yeah,
that makes me wonder, because my son is an only child and Jocelyn's only child, right? And so I wonder if this will be. He always wants a sibling. He's always begging for a sibling. Now he wants an older sibling and a younger sibling. I don't know how that's gonna work. But anyways,
let's go down.
But anyways, now I'm thinking like, oh, that would have been. I wonder what that would have been like for him to have a sibling. Like, do you feel like that impacted how you manage co-parenting, being a daughter of co-parents?
Yeah, I definitely think that I was put into like a parenting role a few times with her, and I think that's another place where you can really like, I don't know, talk with your ex-partner about, you know, what are your expectations for your eldest child, because a lot does fall on the shoulder. If there is one parent in the house, whoever else is the oldest, there are things that are going to land on their shoulders. And just like really always being very conscious about deciding, am I having my kid, is my kid acting like this because this is their personality, or is my kid acting like this because there's not another adult here to act like this? And in what ways can we try and like fill those holes? I think that, I mean, I know we don't have a lot of time. I definitely think that's something that, again, a lot of conscious self-reflection as parents, a lot of communicating with your other parent about your expectations for your kids. So you can sort of match those expectations and pull back when you're like, oh, I realized my kid's doing this a lot and waking up their sibling every day and making breakfast and whatever. I didn't do all of everything, but I know that there are kids who really take on a lot for what another parent would have been doing in their household.
Right.
So you had I'm going back to the dog, because my daughter has been asking me for a dog. She was what's it called, a Shimu? She liked the breed.
Oh, okay.
Shimu, whatever. Yeah. Anyway, looks like a little miniature fox looking thing. But all right. So,
okay, sorry.
Yeah, right. No, it's okay. My bad. I digress. But you also mentioned that you are an artist.
Yeah.
Did you discover art while going through the situation?
Yeah, well, I've always kind of been an artist. One of the funky, cool, fun things about having parents that weren't together is I got like some cool housemates growing up. Because like, you know, when you don't have two adults in a house, suddenly maybe roommates are a thing. We had a painter live with us for a while when I was a kid, and our house kind of became an art collective at my dad's house. And so
I was going to say the mom.
No, actually my dad is super artsy, and he's like the disciplined guy, but he's also like, he's a fun and funky and wild card. He grew up with hippies and was but we had an artist live with us, and he recently actually passed away, and it was really hard for us. He's an amazing person. Charles Moss is an incredible painter. But I was just like surrounded by a lot of art growing up, and it was always sort of, and then on my mom's side, my aunt and my grandma, like, I have all these painters in my family, and so it was very, like, both sides really just sort of led to this, like, and my sister is a singer and a writer and writes musicals and things, like we all were, like, kind of just gonna end up on this very arty path, which is funny, because neither of our parents work in the arts, but it was just sort of, it felt inevitable
Yeah.
And I'm lucky to have supportive parents. It took, the immigrant side to understand and get on board with doing it for a living a little bit longer than my dad, who's always been about, like, he's very pull yourself up by the bootstraps and, like, a very, like, do anything that you want and find a way to make it work kind of thing.
Right.
So he's always been really on board with that and loves art. But, the other side was like, this is a living? You're not a doctor? I'm confused about...
You're not a doctor.
It took some more time to recognize that it could be a legitimate career.
Yes,
Right.
I love it.
That's so cool. Because I was literally thinking you could say your mom was the one that had all the art, but, like, your dad...
It's funny. They're multi-dimensional people.
Right.
Deep and wonderful. And all parents are,
Yeah.
So many layers. And you
All
can
of
be
them.
the strict parent and also the fun, arty, traveling, whatever parent. And both of them have, like, I'm trying to tell my story today. My dad and mom and stepmom and stepdad, everyone have very rich stories in their lives. And they're very whole, multidimensional. Like, I'm chaotic and I have these different sides to me, and so does my dad and so does my mom. And so I don't know. Sometimes I see the ways that they were drawn to each other. And I'd like to think that the things that they liked about each other are the things that come out in me as well.
Yes,
That's
that
so
is
cool.
such a. I love your take on your life in your parents. It just feels very holistic and graceful and, like, loving, but also authentic and candid. And I'm taking something from your learnings. One thing I wanted to also talk on is you mentioned earlier, like, health and how that played a role in maybe the co-parenting experience. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, gosh. I would love co-parents to have lots of conversations about medical things without their children there. And again, back to the whole therapy thing, therapy is, like, one aspect of it. I have a plethora of undiagnosed, some diagnosed, like, issues and problems with my body. And sometimes I feel like even now, and I know it's not her fault necessarily, but, like, I had a really bad episode of, like, health issue thing that happened the other day, and I went to talk to my mom about it, and she started, like, asking me these questions about, have you taken these tests, have you done these things, and in my head all I was thinking was, like, oh my gosh, I did this with my stepmom when I was 15. Like, we went and took all these tests, we did all of these things. I have, like she's asking me all these questions to, like, these are basic. Like, why isn't she on the same page with me about where my health is? And I was, like, upset about it for a second, but then I remembered that, like, they, like, didn't all communicate together about what my health looked like then, I have, like, this stack of records that we kept at my dad's house that are now in my home that, like, my mom never had. And they didn't have, if they did have meetings about it without me, they were not informative or whatever, because my mom, I would go to my mom and I would still, like, I was scared sometimes to have symptoms of all of my sicknesses at my mom's house when I was growing up, because I was worried that it would happen and she would ask me questions and she would try and find solutions when I had already tried those solutions. And she would give me answers that I'm like, Mom, I already did that. And it would be worse for me to deal with what I was going through if I had someone who was checking in so much. And she means it completely out of love. She just didn't know what was going on, And then also, like, they had different solutions and ideas about, like, what sort of medications I should be taking, when I should go to therapy, whatever. And so sometimes things were like, oh, you'll do this thing, you have this solution at this house, whatever. And then I wouldn't have that same kind of space in my other home, and they wouldn't talk through, like, what coping mechanisms have worked, because I have a lot of chronic pain, and my diet was very different at both houses, and my schedule was very different. And so really just, like, having those conversations, and I didn't want to be a part of it. If they were going to have a meeting about my health, I didn't want to be involved at all, because I didn't want there to be arguments. I'm already so overwhelmed about my health things. I feel stressed out about talking about it now. Like, as a teenager, when it was really, like, the height of it, like, you're asking me so many questions, I don't know what to do. Someone else here has the answers. Why am I a part of this? Is sort of what it felt like. And yeah, I definitely think that, again, like, I know that, saying have meetings with your co-parent is, like, the most basic thing you can say, but if your kid is exhibiting any kind of health issue or whatever, that your co-parent is who you need to have detailed conversations
Right.
with. That is who needs to hold the information. Like, your kid shouldn't have to remember that stuff. Their siblings shouldn't have to remember that stuff. My sister would have to, all the time, she would, like, keep track of things that I would need or I would do. And that was sort of the opposite, you know. In a lot of ways, I did a lot of, like, parenting, whatever, with my sister. She also always knew, she could tell what was going on with my health by just looking at me, and that wasn't something all my parents could do always, because my sister and my dog were the two who were with me full time.
Right.
You know, like, just not being able to recognize the same sort of cues and not being able to, you know, and I think just communication again, like, when you have your weekly check-ins, when you want to ask your kid, what did you do this week, if you've already talked to your partner and you're like, oh, I heard that you had like a really bad pain episode. You cried at school and had to go to the nurse's office. How did that feel for you? Like, because your other co-parent already told you that. Like, I would have an episode, unless I, like, ended up in the ER or something, sometimes my mom wouldn't even know. Sometimes my dad wouldn't even know, because they're just like, oh, this happens so often. This is happening in Asha's life so much. Like, we don't even always remember what we have and what we haven't communicated. So just sort of keeping track of that the way, like, a school would. Like, when I'm working at a school, when anything happens with health, an incident report is written.
Right.
What if we, like, had, like, I don't know, like, yeah, like, if you have a kid with health issues, keep a stack of incident reports in your
You know what? That actually,
you can fill that out. Give it to your co-parent. You know what I mean? Like,
I love that.
That's actually pretty dope.
Yeah, like,
Or like a bullet, like a templated just text exchange.
Exactly,
Yeah,
but like,
Google
it's in
Docs
a Google Doc, because then it's not in your
Ooh.
text chain. Like, just something like,
that's true.
oh, I need to update this because this happened, you know? And I think that, honestly, yeah, the whole incident report thing, I think schools are doing it.
Right.
Parents can also.
I think you probably just helped like a few families out. Just kind of like, yo, that's pretty dope. Yeah.
Yeah,
But I will
just in
say,
general.
don't use it as a way to, like, keep notes or whatever, keep tabs and use it as a weapon later on in, like, court or
Exactly.
something.
Right.
Yeah, no, but
just for
like,
the sake of the kid and
they're the
everyone's
sake of
Being
the
clarity.
updated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and again, that
Yeah.
goes back to the whole trust thing. Trusting someone else to live with your kid is trusting them. So you have to both sort of remember, okay, I'm doing this because I love my kid, not because I'm fighting you, and my kid isn't a tool to fight you.
Yeah,
Right.
that part.
That happens. Yeah.
You know?
Let's not do
That.
that. Let's not do that.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
So I'm curious now, as a child growing up in a co-parenting environment, from your viewpoint, what do you believe that your parents did that made it work?
I think, honestly, I've said all this about, you know, the ways that their communication didn't go well. I think all the ways they did communicate. I think they probably checked in with each other and talked to each other more than again, this is all from, like, when I was growing up, all of the kids I knew who had divorced parents, no one had a template of what it was supposed to look like to co-parent. So with no template, they both really decided that prioritizing what we wanted was the most important. Like, again, my mom wanted to move back home, and she stayed in Seattle because she knew that this was where our dad was, and she didn't want us to have to be in one home growing up with only one of our parents. It was really just like, those were the things that really worked when they made selfless decisions. And I know that's another hard thing because parents are human.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of what I'm saying today is like, they're like, well, that's easy for you to say as an adult who doesn't have any kids and isn't, like, separated from someone who's evil, you know? But, like, you know, like,
we wanted your perspective. It's
but
valuable.
it's also, like, you know, the fact that they both had whatever feelings and history with each other and still chose this, like, selfless act of staying near each other and communicating with each other and doing those first few Christmases with us when they first got divorced, and then they didn't do some Christmases, but then we did some Christmases again, you know? like all of the, like, choices that they made, and also respecting what we wanted. So when I was 13, we were at a point where my parents were fighting at my birthday every year. And it just drove me nuts. So I told my parents, I said, whoever's house I'm at for my birthday, you can't be there. The other parent is not allowed to be there for my birthday anymore because you guys fight through my birthdays. And then both of them were like, oh, I'm not going to see my kid on their birthday if we're fighting on at their birthday. So they both were like, they took that as feedback. They didn't go, oh, I'm still going to be at your birthday. Right. My mom stayed away for my next birthday. She would hurt her like hell. And I still am like, oh my God, I did that to my mom. I did an ultimatum to my parents when I was 13. I was like, but, you know, like...
You stated a boundary.
Right. I stated a boundary, which is great. Kids of co-parents, remember, you can have boundaries. That's too. Right. Like, but really, like, for co-parents to listen to their children's boundaries, like, you gotta listen to your kids. Right. Kids, even when they're younger, not 13, whatever, even when they don't have as many talking cues or as many words, kids will show you what their boundaries are all the time. Right. And really, my parents, I think, really tried to listen to what my sister and I's boundaries were.
Right. And respected
it. And respected them. Yeah, and I think that was super duper important, you know. Yeah, definitely something that my parents did well, I think. And as far as, like, you know, my dad talking about how he wasn't going to have a partner who we didn't like, you know, like... My mom, you know, staying away for my birthday, even though that really hurt her, you know, they were like, we're respecting our kids' decisions as they are having them. And so, like, selflessness and listening to your kids is like, whoa. And having enough time away from your kids in order to regenerate yourself after the selflessness that you have to take in order to be a co-parent.
Ooh, I'm going to do a clap on that, because we can't forget that we are humans, and you wove that in really nicely throughout the talk today. So thank you so much. Is there any other final words you want to share? This has been amazing.
I love my parents a lot. I don't want them to think that I'm mom and dad and Sama and stepdad. None of you guys. I was not... I love you. You're a very good parent.
Yes. Yeah. And it shows. Your empathy and ability to see all the sides and also honor your own shows that you had a great network and a family taking care of you. So
they're good people.
It's showing through. It's showing through.
This was amazing. Awesome. I just want to say this was great. I was captivated by your whole entire story.
Thank you guys for talking to me today. And I feel honestly like being able to talk about it now. I'm like, I feel lighter, you know? I just got to talk about this co-parenting.
Absolutely. And I'm going to emphasize this again. You have 3 novels.
At least.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe a memoir. But consider that. That's all I'm going to say. Just consider
he writes books, so he's very passionate.
Right,
Very cool.
Yeah, literature's my thing.
I have to read your books then.
Yeah, absolutely. I got a couple.
Yeah, and in the trunk.
In the trunk, yeah. Got it in the back, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yay.
Awesome.